Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl, continuing our Total Warhammer 3 faction-focused look at what possible lords and heroes could be added into the factions in the future. We know with the release of the roadmap that there will be new legendary heroes and lords added into the game for different factions, as well as reworks, and Harry the Hammer was just released as a legendary hero for the Warriors of Chaos. Now, as with the previous factions, we are trying to focus on those that had army books, had rules, miniatures, or were quite famous in the lore. Well, the Vampire Coast represents an interesting one because while the Vampire Coast in the lore exists and so on, there was never an army book for it. There was kind of like a Vampire Coast kind of like list. There was like a White Dwarf list, Pirates of Sartosa, and things like that. But there was never a Vampire Coast faction as is presented in the Total Warhammer game, though I do love the faction. And oh man, I really hope that Games Workshop dive into this faction and build those miniatures so that we can have them in the old world, which is being brought back as a tabletop game. But without further ado, as we look into the Vampire Coast, the current lords, Luther Harkon, Count Noctilus, Aranessa Salt, Spartan, Solostra, Diafin, all quite interesting characters. And there's definitely a lean towards a board game that was released by Games Workshop known as Dreadfleet, of which Count Noctilus is the leader, essentially, of the evil faction, for want of a better term. So with that, it does mean that there are some possible lords that were also part of his faction in the Dreadfleet game. And I do quite like the way that in the Vampire Coast, you've got Aranessa Saltspite, who's got those Sartosan pirates who are not undead. You've got Solostra Diafin with that Bretonnian connection. So I do think it would be quite interesting to have some of the other Dreadfleet lords, and they could fit in with the faction while offering their own little spin on some units that already exist in the game. So the first one up there is King Amenhotep. He was a Tomb King, and he's a pirate captain on the Curse of Xandri. So, you could definitely see him with Vampire Coast units, but also maybe with some Tomb King units. So we're not necessarily looking at new units being added to the game, just taking existing units and being able to have them under control, as well as the Vampire Coast. So I think King Amenhotep would be an interesting one. You've got Vangheist. He was an undead pirate captain of the Shade Wraith. So he kind of fits as more your traditional Vampire Coast in terms of the units he would have, but he has a really cool looking ship. So that would be really cool to see. The other good one, I think, here is Scretch. Scretch was an undead Skaven and a base pirate captain of the Orb Leviathan. Orb Leviathan, like a big sea monster fish, where the Skaven got eaten by the fish and then essentially ate the fish from the inside out, and then kind of floating around on it. It was brought back to life by Count Noctilus, so he essentially is undead Skaven. So you could definitely see how you could have that sort of Solostra Diafin angle of like those undead Bretonnians. So you could definitely do that with Vampire Coast units, but also with some Skaven in there as well. So I think all three of those lords would be absolutely viable in Vampire Coast. I think they would fit, and I think each one offers something unique, and I could see all three of them being added into the game, and I think they would be very, very cool if they were, and offer something different to what's already there with the other Vampire Coast legendary lords. But with that, I don't really see at the moment a particular legendary hero that sticks out. Maybe there's a more obscure one from the lore that they'd like to that Creative Assembly will bring out. Maybe they'll create one. Who knows? But at the moment, I think they don't necessarily need one. Not every faction needs a legendary hero. Not every faction needs the same amount of legendary lords. But I could certainly see all three of these lords fitting very nicely in the Vampire Coast. Unique ships for the captain to sail on. Which would look very, very good and give some nice variety in the Vampire Coast overall. And there you go, that's my take on who we might be able to see as an additional legendary lord for the Vampire Coast. Hope you've enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't know, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. And as always, if you want to see more content, then please hit that subscribe button. It is free for you to do, but it means a lot for me. And if you disagree with anything I've said here, or there's other lords or heroes that you think should be added to this faction, put it in the comments down below, and let me know who and why you think they should be there, and we can have a good discussion. You've been watching The Ghost Owl. I'll see you very soon.